emphasize on one thing, because I keep seeing discussions around REST versus GraphQL and REST versus Federation and other things. And well, one thing that is, I think it's very important to talk about, because sometimes I hear people say like, yeah, but we can do it with REST and it will be faster and so on and so forth. The reality is, and this is like, it took me very, very long to kind of conclude this, but if you have a website that does what we just described and it's using REST APIs, it is very likely that you are not fully aware what kind of REST API calls this website does until it's fully functional. Versus, you have a federated GraphQL query, and you're now complaining about like, hey Jens, why does it take 10 seconds to plan? And the thing is, with Federation, we are fully aware of the complexity to load this page and the computation to load the data from all these subgraphs, from all the microservices. This computation, it happens when we start up the router, when we warm up the cache, we compute this once, and then we have a description of how do we get the data for this page. Versus, if you have a REST API, the front end starts up and it starts firing all these REST API calls. So with a REST API approach, this whole computation of getting all the data to make the website work, it's the federation in the sense, it's happening in the browser and it's happening at runtime when the user waits. And now the question is like, you have latency between the front end and all your microservices. And this means going back and forth between the front end and all those microservices. It's much slower than doing it on the back end. So now you could say, okay, Jens, let's solve this problem with REST. We move this computation, we move it into the backend. We create a backend for front end, which creates a single REST API that federates the data from my microservices. You can do this. Now you make a single REST API call to this BFF. Now you have a new problem. The BFF essentially means every time you need a new query in the front end, someone has to build and deploy the BFF that now needs to fetch more or less data or whatever. Versus in a federated graph, you have all these teams building microservices. They contribute to the federated graph, and you have the front-end team. They write their query. So actually, they work like fully independent. Versus with REST, either you have the federation in the front end, or you have it in the back end with the BFF. But now the BFF is like your bottleneck, because you have a BFF is nothing else but a self-built single use case federation approach. And actually, what we have figured out is the limiting factor is not so much the tech. And the reason why many companies use Federation is not a technical reason. It's an organizational reason, because you can have the BFF approach or the Federation approach, but people prefer the Federation approach because it gives them more flexibility on the front-end team, on the back-end team, because you don't have to constantly update this BFF. I hope it makes sense.